Hello everyone and welcome back to the garage. In this video, we're gonna cut and rebuild the firewall on the cab, and the C10's chassis becomes a roller. Before we can cut this thing free, I have to pull out the rear suspension, the front suspension, the motor. For the cradle here, I'm gonna take the A-arms off and I'm gonna leave the subframe bolted in until I get some of these other pieces on the bottom of the frame welded. And there's one thing that has me a little concerned. That's not good. I'm hoping that it's just a little bit of banana action, and there are some pieces on the bottom that still need to get welded, so I'm hoping that it takes and pulls it back more square than it is. But if it has a little banana, that's fine, as long as there's no twist. All right, it's time. The chassis is coming off the jig, but I've got some good news. After welding it, this corner of the frame came back down. I do still have to do a tiny bit of welding on the bottom of some of these pieces, but I just can't do it with where it's at. So it's time to get the Sawzall. Before we get too deep in the video, this chassis build has been very cool and very fun so far, and I plan to keep doing it, and the best way you can show your support is to hit that like and subscribe. Let's get back into it. It's still level there. That's good. So far, everything's looking good. We are still square on the tail end. It's drooping down about 3/8 of an inch, maybe a little closer to 1/2 an inch. That's not a big deal because there's nothing on the chassis right now. So once it's loaded, it'll probably straighten up. That's not necessarily what you want, but as long as it's not twisted side to side, I really am not gonna care. The chassis is completely free. We're unbolted in the front, all 8 stanchions are cut off, so it's just hanging out. How heavy is this thing? Oh wow, that's like not bad at all. Now I gotta figure out how to get it off of here. The other question is, where am I gonna put the jig? I don't need it, so I could cut it apart, but it'd be nice to have it just in case. The chassis is done, it's free, it's straight, that's great. Got a bunch of crap piled on it because we're going for one more drive. This thing's been sitting for 3 months and I have no idea how much fuel's in it, so. Ooh. It's an LS, of course it's gonna start. The chassis off the jig. There's a few things left to weld. Like I couldn't get to these because the ground was too close. I gotta fix some of these. They're not super pretty, but that's what grinders are for. And before we do that, this is gonna go. I'm chopping it up because I'm not making another one. Well, not making another one with this jig at least. It's been a couple days, but the entire chassis is welded up. And I started welding up the rear end. So it's time to get this thing painted, and then we're gonna start putting it back together. The top of the chassis to about here is painted, and I got an exciting phone call. The fuel cell is done. I gave Andy at Sorg Welding the specs for the tank, and he whipped this thing up for me. It's an 8x20x30, which is about a 21-gallon tank. We have a C10 style pickup tube in it, and all the rest of the goodies. The filler neck, pickup tube, fuel sender, weld bunks, all that was from Boyd Welding. There's a link in the description if you want to check their stuff out and build your own tank. So now that that is done, we can set the fuel cell tabs. The chassis is painted, the C5 front stub is on, so now it's time to start putting on the cantilever suspension. If you want to know a little bit more about the cantilever suspension, you can click the card right here and check out my last video. The front clip is gone. Well, the core support's still there, but that doesn't need to come off just yet. But the goal today is to get the cab ready to come off and get set on the new chassis so I can make the cab mounts. It does hurt a little bit taking this truck apart, but it's gonna be so much cooler and perform better in the end. So now I'm gonna get everything else from the inside of the truck out, and we'll keep marching forward on getting this thing over here. So my gauge cluster started twitching out halfway through last season, and right there is why. My casing got pushed back, and I got a couple sheared wires. The rat's nest is out for good. When I go to put this back together, that is not going back in there. I'm gonna be redoing basically everything from scratch. But that's for another video. Let's keep moving. It's young Greg. Holy crap. I cannot stop looking at this thing. I do have the push rods out of the front suspension right now, so the tire is about 3 to 4 inches lower than it should be. But other than that, you can get a pretty good perspective of how everything's gonna look under the hood. I have finished up welding on the rear end, so I did about 1 inch at a time and was a little conservative on the heat. According to Quick Performance, you want just enough heat to get a good weld, and I think I achieved that. A few of you were concerned about my top 3-link mount, in specific with this Heim joint getting loaded against the ball. So I did reach out to heimjoints.net, that's the company that I got all these Heim joints from, and they said that that joint can take about 20,000 pounds of load in that direction. Well, the truck shouldn't see that kind of force unless I slide the rear end into a curb. And if I do that, a whole bunch of other stuff's gonna be breaking anyway, so it should be just fine. The next thing on the list are the front and rear cab mounts. I'm going solid bushings on these, so I will have an aluminum spacer in there instead of the rubber spacer that is there from factory. The front cab mounts are gonna be basically identical to the ones on the factory frame, but the rear ones are gonna be quite a bit different. The front ones stick outside the frame, and the rear ones stick inside the frame. So on the new chassis, right there are where the old cab mounts would be. So I've decided to take and make my own everything on the outside similar to the front. The cab has this nice structural rib that runs all the way across the back, and right here is the original cab mount. So I'm just gonna make some metal that's gonna graft around that rib. Then we'll have a little pedestal that comes up off the chassis, and it'll be a nice, solid body mount. The front cab mounts are already on, and right here are the rear cab mounts. And they've already changed from what I told you like probably 15 seconds ago. So what didn't change is the aluminum spacer for the solid body mount. This is just a 3/4 thick spacer, and I can change this if I need to shim the cab up or down or twist something around. The concept with these did not change, however. So we have a pedestal that will get welded onto the chassis, and then a clamshell style thing that's gonna get welded onto the cab. That would be a good idea, huh? So there's the cab mount. It's just hanging out right now. But I told you she changed. Now it's on the inside of the frame. So that little brace that's underneath there actually tapers down as it gets to the edge. So I'd either have to redesign that or just flip it to the inside. So I flipped it to the inside. The rear cab mounts are in place, and the cab is sitting on them. This video is probably gonna be a long one. Sorry, not sorry, but I'm gonna continue the theme of jumping around, and we're gonna start cutting the firewall. Hello! This is great, I get to be the cameraman. Pro Touring Truck Shootout live on Instagram. They do a weekly episode and they usually mention me, so you should definitely go check them out. I just saw where the block is, oh my god. The mock-up block and trans is in, and I got the head sitting on there. And I have to do a little bit more trimming to get the headers to clear on both sides. Right back, let's see how this thing fits. It's been a few hours. My buddy Zach is over here helping me out. We kind of just put our heads down and have been working. So we have the back portion of the trans tunnel in. It's a little bit taller than we'd like, but we're just gonna send it for now. Right now, Zach is trimming up some of the firewall pieces. We have all these templates that we're cutting out of cardboard, and we're kind of just forming this thing as we go. What it's looking like, we're gonna go back about 4 inches, pitch down on a 45, and then pitch down and go all the way to the back, and then build the whole thing out. So we have the firewall pieces taped in place. They fit pretty nice, and it's gonna give a pretty decent look from the engine bay with that little bit of a 45 kick in there. It shows that we at least tried to make this look good. So right now we're working on getting basically the back half of the tranny up toward that area figured out. I wish I could tell you more of what our plan is, but we're kind of just shooting by the hip as we go. Zach just took off, but we got a ton done. We got basically the entire firewall mocked up. We just have this one last piece to make over top of the tranny. And from in the engine bay, I think this actually looks pretty nice. So we extended straight back off the top and then kicked down on a 45, kept that rolling all the way to the back of the firewall. These edge pieces come straight back, and then these kick in on a 45 and they end at the same point at the trans tunnel. But this whole process is going great. The chassis was built in CAD, the firewall was built in CAD, everything's in CAD. Andy and I came back. We got the first half of it sitting in there tacked up. I think it looks pretty good. So I think the plan is to make the last 3 pieces and get them tacked in. Right, Andy? That's right. Alrighty. So the firewall was finished, but we had a few clearance issues up front and in the back. So the harmonic balancers on the truck, the Corvette, and the Camaro are all different. So this is a Camaro balancer, and that is a truck balancer. It's a little hard to see, but the Camaro one actually sticks out about an inch less than the truck one. And the Corvette one is about an inch shorter than the Camaro one. So now we get to the problem that I had. So with the power steering rack mounted in here, the truck harmonic balancer would have been inside the power steering rack. No problem, I have the Camaro front accessory stuff, I'll just run that. The alternator is mounted right here on a Camaro, so that put the alternator and the valving on the rack in the same place. So I was like, okay, I'll get the Corvette stuff. Well, that puts the alternator all the way out here, and it probably would run into the coilover setup. And we go back to the truck stuff, and it's in the power steering rack. So none of that was gonna work. I went through and looked at a whole bunch of different options to try to put an aftermarket accessory drive kit on here, something like that, but nothing was going to clear correctly. So the solution I came up with was move the motor 2 inches further back. So I whipped up a new transmission cross member and new motor mounts and got it pushed back probably closer to 2 1/4. So now the motor's pushed back about 8 inches further than it was in the old chassis. The front wheel center is right there, and the block is fully behind that. So the truck is officially, by definition, a front mid-engine. So I have a mid-engine C10. So since the motor was pushed back 2 more inches, the intake was hitting on the back of the beautiful firewall that I just finished, and the header was also hitting down here, but I already made a new patch panel for that. So now the cab's gonna come off, finish welding that, and then start putting the chassis together in its final form. This power steering rack is going to be the death of this truck. So we set the motor in, and the power steering pulley was just barely touching the rear output hose off of the valving. We took the shim plate out of the rear trans mount, and we're gonna have 1/4 inch spacers come in here. So the back's gonna go down a little bit, the front should come up, and then we should clear. The motor and trans are in their final resting place. The front and rear suspension is put together with the ride height bars, so we can see how low this chassis actually is. So the power steering pump clearance has been solved. There's about 3/8 of an inch of gap between there now. I might take and try to put a little bit of a bend in the end of this pipe just so we have a little bit more room. There's a 1/4 inch thick aluminum spacer in the front, and we took this other shim plate out of the rear. The rear suspension is fully set up, and I also got the third member. The center section was put together by Quick Performance. It's a Yukon main case, 350 gears, a helical posi. It's a bad unit. This rear end is an absolute beast for what I will be doing, and that is a nice breath of fresh air compared to the old rear end. I had the old 10 bolt out of the old chassis probably 4 or 5 times, and I rebuilt it twice last season because it was just not happy. But thanks to Quick Performance, that should never be an issue again. So with that, the chassis is officially a roller. The headers are bolted on. I did trim the collectors, but you can see both of them are gonna clear nice. That's something we're gonna tackle in the next video, along with the brake lines, the fuel system, and hopefully final mounting the cab too. If you made it to the end of this video, I want you to guess how much it cost to build this chassis. So on that note, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Pro Touring Truck Shootout or bust.